Chapter 69. Kara. Blue shuffles where he stands, wringing the strap of the backpack I've given him over and over again, in a bid to fight back some of his nervous tension. I can't blame him for being nervous. Everyone's feeling the anxiety in the air. We've all gathered in the field outside of the school, past where the manicured space of the back courtyard comes to an end, all the 30 or so students that have decided to take part in this. The field is a large swath of unmaintained no-man's land, where students, at least those without special responsibilities or permissions, are advised never to go. It provides a buffer zone for the forest on the property, a well-maintained, if artificially stocked, area that holds just about every variety of magical animal, plant, or mineral that they could get a hold of. Looking around, it's not just first years gathered here. There are some second years and a handful of grad students. They probably found the competition fun their first time around and decided to voluntarily take part in this whole thing again. We've all gathered here for a special extra credit assignment for quals. Of course, the school can't actually change points for the national exam, but this little practical would count towards school-wide honors. It could probably help you get an internship, or maybe a recommendation for a grant or exclusive project. When Linnell told me that this was the punishment the committee had decided on for me, I was confused. It seemed like such an odd thing to force participation in, but looking over the records made it a little easier to understand. The records show an inordinately high percentage of injuries and accidents from these little exams. That, coupled with the printout of the lax rules and total lack of oversight, makes it all a little more understandable. A forest full of magical creatures is a dangerous place to be, even for someone who's trained. It's meant to be a practical examination of skill. In the loosest possible sense, I suppose that makes sense. It'll be a lot easier for people who studied their materials to identify and steer clear of dangerous creatures and poisonous plants. A trek through the woods would go more smoothly for someone who could protect themselves, who could utilize magic not only to keep themselves safe, but could put it to practical use and hide the signature of their magic. The older students all have some variety of the same sigil painted on them, or an object they carry, a magical cloaker. There are plenty of things in this forest that would be attracted to a strong source of magic and feed from it until there's nothing left. The committee has to be aware of all the students that have taken an interest in my new style of casting. Blue's classes grow every day, from what he tells me. They need a way to show the students that I'm not all their little stories say that I am. If I think about it in those terms, making me participate in this exam actually makes sense. They must think that in a practical setting, without time to prepare, I will fail and make a fool of myself, and my peers will think I just got lucky in class. I should be worried about that. I really should be worried about scholastically planned public humiliation. I should be worrying about a potentially dangerous practical exam that I am being forced to take part in. Hell, I should be worried about quals at the end of this semester. But no, that would be too easy for the stars to ever let me get away with that. I have too many other things on my mind. I haven't even been fucking studying like I should because 2 of my teachers decided to come into my home and let me know they have a little secret. A little secret that was actually more of a big secret that could get them kicked out of the school in the best case scenario, charged with petty treason, and imprisoned at worst. Blue pushes himself a little closer to me. I give him an absent pat as I try not to let the internal worrying become external. There are a few more people coming late, or perhaps on time, given that our assignments haven't been doled out yet. Either way, we seem to be approaching the limit for people in this school willing to sacrifice themselves for a letter of recommendation. I'm surprised to see that so many of them are bringing their familiars. If Linnell hadn't told me to bring Blue, I would have left him at home so there was no chance he could get hurt. Genevieve's here. She'd come up to me earlier when she first saw me, gave me a hug and some motivational lines that were barely concealed barbs. It's all for show, I reminded myself, as I parroted back encouragement like some smitten farm boy who doesn't know what he's gotten into. No one else came to talk to me, but they have their fair share of words about me. They've broken off into little groups, whispering and pointing when they think I won't notice. I focus my attention on Blue. He's dressed in the things I picked out for him, and for that I'm glad. It's one less thing I have to worry about. He's got long, thick trousers with lemongrass oil sprinkled on them, a tall pair of thick-soled boots with wolfsbane rubbed into the fabric lining that are perfect for this little jaunt through hell, and a long-sleeved shirt with cinnamon sewed into the pocket for protections of intent. That, in addition to the iron chapel key to protect from a surprising variety of things, hanging outside of a thick winter coat to ward off the cold. It's easier to fuss about Blue rather than worry about the revolution that might be brewing just outside of class. I gave them my answer, as sick as it made me feel. There's no use feeling bad about it days later. I promised that I'd help them, or at least I promised I'd try. But it's too big a risk for me and Blue. The school is out for my head. Linnell knew that, even when she glared at me and called me a hypocrite. She had said that halfway in, halfway out wasn't a real option. But Brendan understood. Or at least, he said he had understood. All that really registered was the disappointment on his features. Linnell had yelled and raged the more I tried to explain. I think that if we had been alone, she would have gotten physical. But Brendan was there, and Chuha had calmed her down. I grit my teeth at the memory. I don't like feeling helpless. I don't like not being able to do something. I want to help. I do. But the disciplinary committee, hell, the whole school is already going over my actions with a fine-toothed comb. I can't bring that kind of attention around if we aren't careful. And I haven't been careful. I've been sloppy. And that's why we're in this predicament. They gave me some paperwork then. There were all kinds of things they were trying to get established in school, and reforms in local legal courts, and regulations for testing labs. They've got a lot of plates spinning at once. They've got people in a lot of different places. It was something to prove themselves, they had said. Things to look over in case I change my mind or have any ideas that might help. It's not just them. It's not just 2 faculty members at Magic's Academia being crazy. They have people, others who share their ideals, all trying to make cautious steps so that they can remain in a place where they can affect change. People working in all different sectors. I appreciate the kind of courage that it took to leave that with me. The papers alone could get them in trouble if they found their way into the wrong hands. This was a show of trust, or at least the rocky start of it. Chua came back every day to check up on me during my suspension, presumably on Linnell's orders. I feel like her orders had more to do with remaining unseen than Chua cared to attempt. She's a fairly stealthy one when she wants to be, but for some reason when it's time for a tea break in the garden, she's never too stealthy. I eventually had to start telling Blue that a new feral had stopped by, though no sign of Thana. Odd. And then there's Blue. My thoughts automatically shuttle back to the jittery little kitty by my side. I don't know what to do about him. Every morning for the past week he's gone off with Shauna and come back late after training with Ande. I try to do nice things. I make food, I listen, hell, I even offer to give him a massage when he says he's feeling sore. But Linnell's words still haunt me. You treat him like a tool. Were those Blue's words? Or hers? I have no idea what Blue told her, what questions she asked my familiar when they were alone. But whatever happened gave her a very unfavorable opinion of me, enough for her to warn her familiar that I was potentially dangerous. Blue doesn't seem fazed by Linnell, even when I'd tried to bring her up a couple nights later. He didn't seem at all shaken coming back from Linnell's interrogation. Perhaps a little shaky and subdued, but all that was fixed in the next day. Maybe that's the problem. Blue still smiles at me. He's respectful, but not cowed. He doesn't try to eat from the floor anymore, and he takes my presence much more easily than he had before. I think of the way that he goes boneless in my arms, the soft purring noises that he makes when he's half asleep against my chest. I'm not an idiot. I know that it's not all sunshine and rainbows. I'm not blind to the fear in his eyes when he wakes up from a nightmare. The way he has to fight his instincts to keep from crumbling to the floor when he's trying to apologize. I know how hard it is for him. I know it's a process. But I thought I could at least trust him to tell me when something's wrong. He laughs, he smiles, he sleeps in my bed every night, but I don't know what I can trust anymore. Does he even like it when I pet him? Or is he just pleasing his master? Blue's ears are twitching, and I can't believe it's taken me so long to recognize the angry flicking of his tail. I press the heel of my hand to my forehead in a bid to stop the headache before it starts as I turn back to Blue and remove myself forcefully from my useless wallowing. "Blue, what's wrong?" I ask, trying for something of a comforting smile. He deserves that much. I shouldn't be worrying about things like this when my primary goal should be making sure we get through this safely. It'll be enough of a challenge on its own, and we can come back to everything else after we've survived. "I'm not a black cat," he says with a pout, and the entirety of my internal dialogue grinds to a halt. Okay, what? I'm halfway through trying to form a response to that when Blue takes pity on me and explains his statement himself. "They are saying I'm a black cat. I'm not. I'm a tortoiseshell." He says it so adamantly that it's hard to argue, but I can't help but feel I'm missing something here. "Blue, that's usually 2 colors other than white," I remind him, playfully flicking at the tip of his ear to watch it twitch. Blue has 2 colors, so he's not a black cat, at least not a completely black cat, but the other color is white, not something that typically counts when you're defining a tortoiseshell. "I know, I have a—" He stops himself, a blush rising high on his cheeks as he brushes the long ends of his hair up. Sure enough, on the underside of his hair he does have specklings of orange. His hair is just so thick that it's hard to see past the dominant color. "Okay, so you're a tortoiseshell," I concede with a nod, stripping one of the charmed leather bands from my wrist as I move to tie his hair up. I fight with a piece of my brain that says any more charms and he will start to actively attract things, and just focus on the question at hand. "Blue, what brought this on?" Blue's silent for a long moment, shoulders and back tense as I finish tying up the longest bits of his hair. I can't help but think it's very pretty this way. Blue usually hides behind the longer bits of his hair, and the extra layer of protection puts my mind at ease. "I'm not a black cat, even though people are saying that I am. I don't want to bring you bad luck," he stutters out. The blush on his cheeks has spread to the rest of his face. "You're not bad luck, Blue." My words come automatically, without much thought as I scritch him behind his ear in the place that makes him purr. "To be honest, you are probably the best thing that's ever happened to me." Blue's ears shoot up, and it's not until then that I realize I've said the last part aloud. Luckily, before he has the chance to respond, our advisor has stepped up on his platform. The advisor for this exam is a kindly-looking middle-aged man, soft around the edges, but not overweight. He's got a rounded hat with an oddly large feather in it, but other than his odd taste in headwear, he seems to be dressed normally. His robes are simply designed, but they're of good quality. They're the simple white and green robes of a medical professional, but cut in a magister's style. I find it odd that there's such a highly ranked healer in this school who's serving in medicine professionally. That kind of skill and dedication is rare, even among mages born with such affinities. Either way, I can't help but be relieved that there's at least a medic on site. "Students!" he bellows, his voice carrying unnaturally loud in the space. "You have gathered here today to test yourselves against a real-life scenario. You have come despite the dangers and the will of your teachers." He cocks a grin, looking at one particular group of students that all giggle and squirm under his direct gaze. "You've all gathered here bright and early, sacrificed your long weekend to this test. I applaud your dedication and valor. Now, come to the hat and receive your assignments." He takes off his hat, and with a puff of smoke, it reappears at the base of his platform, within our reach. filled to the brim with folded little cards. I don't know him, but he has to be a teacher. Too many students seem to know him for it to be anything else. He certainly isn't a member of any higher-ranked council. One by one, the students go up to the hat and pull their assignments from the collection of cards. Some groan, and others whoop for joy. Some don't even bother to look at their cards with so many people around. There's no cheating off of someone else in this exam. For one, there's no written exam. But for another, we all have different answers. You can't let someone else do all the work and then step in at the last moment to steal the glory. In this exam, we all have to be more or less independent. Everyone's looking for something different. Everyone's got a different assignment. I step up to the hat with none of the flourish of the rest of my classmates. I try not to let the anxious feeling rolling in my stomach sway me as I look over the cards. They all look the same, each one a perfectly identical piece of cardstock that will either be easy enough to accomplish or kill me and Blue in the process of retrieving it. I close my eyes and pull out one of the cards like I'm ripping off a bandage. I back away without opening it, only daring to read it after another 2 people have gone up to get their assignments. The tinted cardstock unfolds without resistance, and all too soon I am staring down at the neatly printed gold letters that almost seem to glow in the early morning light. Locate and retrieve the binding object of an imp. I shove the piece of cardstock into my back pocket and try not to let my nerves show. Imps. Just my luck. At least it's something I know. It's something of a ceremony as each student goes up and retrieves their assignment, going back to their standing place on the field. "Oh, retrieve the egg of a hippogriff!" Genevieve giggles to her flock, and they laugh alongside her, congratulating her for getting an assignment worthy of her talents, getting something noteworthy while they were tasked with what they consider to be more trivial things. We have fucking hippogriffs on this campus? My mind is a blank panic, and I'm suddenly a lot less willing to go into this forest. Eventually, we've cycled through all the students, and we're all presented with a small stone marked with a sigil. The rules say we have 3 days to complete our assignments. Anything over that, and it no longer counts for the challenge. After a few years of incidents, we also get these little geodes. They're calling them rescue crystals. If we get hurt or stuck to a point that we cannot continue, we're supposed to break the geodes open, and it will send a flare to signal where we are so they'll be able to find us. They should be able to get to us in 10 minutes. But I can't help but wonder what else would be able to get to us in that time. There's an unnecessary countdown after that, where everybody goes sprinting into the woods like they'll be able to find their objects and get back in an even 500-meter dash. I just hold Blue back until the echo of their footfalls has faded into the distance. Then we make our way into the forest. Even in the dead of winter, this forest is beautiful. Many of the plants are too large to be really hurt by the temperate winters this region is used to having. That, or the magical essences within them, keep them safe from the frost. Winter settles over this place like a blanket, soothing and calm, but not strangling the life out of the place. The signs that people look for to indicate life and vibrance are moving at a crawling pace, but the forest is no less alive. Winter isn't a death. It's simply another type of life. It's hard to remember that when I haven't been able to connect with that alternate side of things. But the indisputable fact remains, whether I acknowledge it or not. Some things are quiet, some things are dormant, while others are very much not. The trees, though muted by their winter sleep, still house a variety of life, some sleepy as their home, others not. The forest has sky foxes, probably brought in from a reserve in Durian. They are used to a much snowier winter, so their white fluffy bodies are easy to spot in the still vastly brown underbrush. They come closer than they should, than they would if they were actually wild. This forest is protected, and as such very few people are ever in it, almost never without direct supervision. The only exceptions seem to be for these exams. They have no reason to fear us, and so they trot along at our sides for a while, perhaps confused at the new large animals in their forest. It's Blue that breaks our comfortable silence. First, when I stop at the fallen base of a tree, there's all kinds of mosses and berries that prefer the quiet time as their growing season. A handful that are edible, too, but when I start handing them off to Blue to try, he only holds them hesitantly. What, what do we need to do? He asks quietly, rolling a crabapple bud between his fingers. Fuck, I've been so lost in the absolute wonder of wandering through a large forest that I let myself forget why we were here in the first place. I try to ignore my excitement at seeing a bush of rose hips over on the other side of the little brook, and focus, even as I wave Blue over. Well, we have to find an imp bound to an object and bring back the object. I sum it up as briefly as I can, trying to make it sound like less of a problem than it is. Blue isn't having it, and even as I hop up onto the log, I can see the telltale narrowing of his eyes that shows me just how little he's trusting my words. Still, he takes my offered hand and climbs up onto the log with me. It should feel good that he trusts me, but something inside me turns at the thought that he is obeying me because he thought it was an order, even though it goes against what he wants. "Is that bad?" he asks, quirking his brow. It takes me a second to realize that he's clutching my hand in his own. He's not letting me turn away from him and lie. I can't suppress the smile that curls across my face at that. It's the behavior of a very bad familiar, bothering his master and calling him out. It's very bad behavior, and I couldn't be happier. Well, it's certainly no disturb the nest of a hippogriff, but it's pretty bad. I answer honestly, taking a step back on the log and pulling Blue along with me. The log isn't terribly unstable, and it can't have fallen long ago. There's nearly no rot, though there is a little bit of moss growing up the side. I shift over, keeping my eyes forward, keeping one of Blue's hands in mine. It shouldn't be difficult to cross, but a little extra support never hurt anybody. "I think we could get an egg, if we wanted to," Blue mumbles, more to himself than anything, but I have to fight back a laugh. I wonder if Blue knows what a hippogriff is, if he knows just how dangerous and territorial they are. "We don't want to, trust me. Besides, imps are plenty challenging, those pranky little bastards," my mind finishes what my mouth could not, as I'm yanked backwards and feel myself go into a half-second free-fall. The water of the brooks are freezing, as Blue and I learn. Whether he misstepped or slipped on a piece of wet moss, he pulls me down with him. There is doubt it will get cold enough to freeze over. All of the storm mages keep reporting that there is a temperate winter in the works this year, but at the moment I can't bring myself to agree. "Stars, that's cold!" I shout once I get my feet under me again, but that's a battle that I quickly lose. There's not a lot of water, and it's not moving terribly fast, but it still takes a few seconds to right myself, and picking myself up in the middle of the stream seems impossible. My clothes are a weight that drags me down, and the supplies I've packed even more so. My hands scrabble on the stone bottom of the bed, scraping my palms, but my mind is blind to every sensation except for cold. "Blue? Blue, are you all right?" I call. I didn't see him flailing, but this water isn't deep enough to be dangerous. I heave myself out of the water with a wet splat and sit up on the bank, my eyes wide as I look for any sign of Blue struggling in the water, but there are none. Blue's not struggling in the water. He's frozen right where he fell in the middle of the stream. He's just sitting there on his hands and knees, letting the water run over him even though he's trembling. I strip off my backpack and outermost layer and wade back into the frigid water. I don't know what's wrong with Blue, but I am worried he might be going into shock. Or, based on how bad he is at regulating his temperature on his own, hypothermia. I just don't understand why he'd freeze up like that. It's like he's... I stop in the water, only inches away from pulling him up. His eyes are wide. He's looking at something. As soon as the admittedly obvious fact registers in my mind, I feel my heart drop to my stomach. I follow Blue's eyes, and I look to where he's looking. A frankly enormous buck stands just before us, just a few feet from the stream. Its long legs show off the well-lined muscles of its body. It's unnaturally large, with just the barest dappling of tan covering a primarily white coat. Long lines of black fur streak across the creature's face and run down its back. I recognize the distinct shape of the antlers, but only from the picture in my textbook. There's an extremely long brow tine which forms the main beam. The two tines form a continuous curve at right angles to the closely set pedicels. I almost laugh as I recall the exacting terminology from the book. The antlers of the opposite sides are asymmetrical with respect to each other. The beams are unbranched initially, whereas curvature increases as length increases, and they get forked. A sangin. The text said nothing about how beautiful it is, how elegant the lines of this creature are. It did nothing to describe how intimidating the creature is in real life, how small it makes you feel, how it practically oozes latent magic and makes the whole area around it smell like ozone, how the animal's eyes see into your soul when it stares at you, or how its ears twitch like a common deer. It snorts and takes a few steps forward, managing to make even the casual motion regal and full of grace. It snaps me out of my daze. I yank on the back of Blue's backpack, pulling him up with me until we are out of the stream and sitting safely on the other side of the bank. It gives another little huff at that, halting its own motions until we stop our retreat. I suppose that makes sense. They are very skittish animals. That, along with their rarity, makes them an impossibly rare find anywhere but their native breeding grounds. Blue's still gaping openly at the creature, and if fear weren't preventing it, I would be too. Sangin aren't known for their violence, but it isn't unheard of. There's something of guardian spirits once they've adopted an area. If they determine their territory to be under threat, then they have been known to use their manipulation of magic for the destructive. The Sangin steps forward into the water, its gaze trained squarely on us. The water's no problem for such a massive beast, and it crosses with single-minded determination, only stopping once it's directly in front of us. It bends its head, examining the two odd creatures that have wandered into its forest. My heart feels like it's going to pound out of my chest as it considers us, measuring us against some unknown metric. Before it snorts, the warm breath hitting my face and brushing Blue's bangs out of his own face. It takes me a moment to realize that's only possible because Blue's dry, and an even longer moment to realize that the cold has left my body entirely. We are dry, and whatever interest the Sangin had in us is over, as it walks away slowly, unconcerned with the scene it's left behind in its wake. I sit there for a long time, just staring at the place this beast stood, just holding Blue against my chest. Blue squirms after a minute, but I'm too shaky to even consider letting go. Stars, we could have died just then. If the Sangin decided he didn't like the look of us, he could have just as easily used his magic to burn us, could have trampled us underfoot, any number of things. Kara? Blue squeaks after he presumably can take no more. Yeah, I stutter as I release my grip on him. I shouldn't force him, especially because I'm having the tiniest little mental breakdown, and I probably don't have the greatest control of my faculty. Wait, did he say Kara? Blue! Stars, I'm so sorry. Stars, I'm so proud of you. I can't help it. I pull him right back into my arms and pepper the top of his head with kisses. Rewards, all the rewards. Is there anything you want? Anything at all, baby? He squirms in my arms, making a singularly disgruntled huffing sound even as he pushes himself back into my chest. We should move. We're going to get all wet again, and I don't think he'll come back just to dry us off again, Blue mumbles as he squirms in earnest this time. Right, yes. I agree at once, standing and going to find where exactly my coat and backpack ended up. Blue's waiting for me when I turn back around, pulling his hair back up into the tie I've given him. There's a thrum of warmth that shoots through me at the sight. I keep expecting to be alone. I've been alone on this journey so long. I wasn't sure what was going to happen when someone new was thrown into the mix. But with Blue, there's something so casual about the way he completely rewrites the way I've come to understand my life. He doesn't even know he's done it, but he's wormed his way into my heart, into my home, into my bed. I shake my head to stop that train of thought and join Blue on the path he thinks he's found. I've wasted too much time already. We have to get down to business. What are imps? Blue asks as we pass through a clearing and I make him try crystal fruit for the first time. Well, I stall, trying to dredge up all that knowledge that I touched exactly once in a textbook. To be perfectly fair, I've never met a bound imp. But you have met an imp, Blue gathers quickly, based on my wording of my answer. Always so smart. I have made the acquaintance of quite a few of those little buggers. Yes. I grimace, trying not to think too hard about the imps I've met. What are they like? Blue asks, biting into the mostly clear fruit that I've picked for him. It's a little overripe, but they're a little sweeter that way, and their peels are much easier to get through. Blue seems to like it, at least. Well, they are tricky, conniving little things, but I can't say they're that bad. I try to answer honestly. Blue just squints at me as he chews his fruit. It shouldn't be, but it is very funny to watch him call me out when I'm not making sense to him. I suppose I'm not portraying them in the best light, I admit sheepishly, trying to separate my own opinion of them from a more practical definition. Imps don't like to be bored. They're little creatures of chaos that like to mess with people and play pranks on them. They aren't malicious, but they aren't human. They don't know where to draw the line, or that a line even exists. So they play pranks, like jokes? Blue quirks his ears in confusion. I see where I messed up. Of course Blue's mind would go to the more innocent incarnation. Like leading people off the path and getting them lost in a big forest where they might die. Like stealing berries and painting up the sides of travelers' bags. To them, there's no difference, I explain, watching Blue go pale as he grasps the situation. I can see how that would be dangerous, he says blandly, taking another bite of his fruit. Imps typically want attention and companionship, I continue, trying to remember all that I can of the little creatures. Like I said, they don't like being alone or bored. They like people, pretty much any intelligent being, and if they find any, they will try to make friends. But they will still prank and joke, and that's where a lot of the evil stories of imps come from. Evil? Blue looks up at me with wide eyes, and I realize that even with the stories I'd been telling him, he hadn't made the leap to assuming that the little buggers were classified as evil. Well, people will agree to be their friends, not knowing what that means, and they will get tired of putting up with them. They're more into entertaining themselves than helping someone, so they don't fit into a common social, moral structure. It's the same for a lot of spirits or beasts. They don't have rules to follow, so when you measure them up against rules of your own, they don't have the best results, I explain, hoping that at least some of that made sense. Blue jumps up, climbing onto a moss-slick rock that's forced a tree to grow around it. I almost stop him, but I can see no other signs of weirdness, no mushroom circles or sudden sweet smells. There's another crystal fruit at the top of the mound, where a set of climbing vines has managed to work its way up the tree. I watch him go, a little surprised that he doesn't trip when the log had caused so much trouble before, though I suppose it helps that no mythical beasts are distracting him this time. He climbs with such grace and energy that I'm surprised I didn't notice it before. I wonder how terribly stir-crazy I've made him, only just now letting him get his energy out in a studio. He jumps down in one clean move, nearly giving me a heart attack in the process. Blue goes down to all fours, absorbing some of the shock of the fall. There's no ominous cracking, and Blue doesn't stay down. He rises just as gracefully as he fell. Either he doesn't register the danger he was in, or he just didn't care, because his only reaction to hitting the ground is to smile up at me and offer the fruit. So, what about a bound imp? What's so different about them? Blue asks, as though nothing has happened, and I just have to settle for a smile that I can't seem to wipe off my face. He's always giving himself such little credit for all the things he accomplishes. All his talents and skills he just sweeps under the rug and dismisses. Bound imps are imps that have been bound to objects. I give the simple, obvious answer before shifting to something more specific. Usually swords or necklaces, something noticeable. Those imps were chosen because they were more powerful than average, or maybe they had a special talent that made them worth capturing. So, where would you usually find an imp? Blue turns a quick circle, looking closely at the trees and surrounding underbrush. Well, it depends on what kind you're looking for. I hedge, enjoying the wide-eyed stare that Blue gives at that. There are multiple kinds? He gasps. So many. Though I assume they want us to find a more garden variety if they sent us out into the woods. No chance of finding a brownie out here. I chuckle. Wait! What's a... Blue sputters, but I cut him off. It's a different type of imp. A household spirit. Pretty rare nowadays, at least in big cities. They don't like large populations. It's too easy to be seen. I explain the joke. Blue just nods, silently accepting what I've told him. I can almost see him filing that information away for later, just in case it might be useful. So, what are we looking for? Blue's voice goes hushed, as though the imp could be listening to us right now and run away. Standard house grounds of a forest imp? Well, we're looking for mushroom rings or stone outcroppings covered in soft moss. The one we are looking for is too strong to be an attendant, so we don't have to worry about that. All of that either near a water source or a place with high activity. Some place the animals of this forest visit regularly. This is a social spirit. It won't want to be far from a source of activity. We look for a good spot. Having so many qualifiers does help to narrow down the search. Water is a top priority, and it doesn't take long to find another little brook. This one's only a few inches deep, moving nice and slow as it snakes its way through a section of densely packed trees. It's not hard to follow it until we find a clearing, and then even further until we find the base of the artificial mountain that's been constructed as a biome for some of the more particular species they house here. We wander around there for a while, trying to pick up clues from the rock face. For the most part, the little caverns are inhabited, something you recognize immediately when you are stupid enough to repeatedly stick your face into their spaces. The sun's dipping by the time we find an outcropping of stone that looks promising. It's not like the dens of other small animals. It's an open space that has all manner of trinkets and baubles, a little hoarder's collection. It's the perfect place for something bound to a particular object to hide. If you keep all the precious trinkets together, then you're hiding in plain sight. It's actually pretty smart. But more than anything else, it's the fresh cluster of mushrooms encircling the area that makes me certain we've found our mark. There's nothing here, Blue whines, clearly unconvinced, but I just keep unpacking the sleeping bags and chalk for the protective circle. We'll have to set up camp soon, and there's far too many things that can get to us in this area for me to forego this extra precautionary measure. Blue just pouts as he clears some space on the forest floor, ensuring that we at least won't have rocks poking us in the back all night. There's no need to get frustrated. It probably isn't home right now. You can't fault it for wanting to go out for a walk. I try to soothe him, but he seems more put off than comforted by my words. But you said it was bound to an object, Blue whines, looking over his shoulder and around at the surrounding, rapidly darkening forest. Yes, bound, I agree. It has its radius, and there's nothing that prevents it from picking up its own item and moving it. Blue just pouts, taking his sleeping bag from my back and tossing it to the ground, smoothing it out in jagged movements as he refuses to address me. Come on, now. How terrible would you have felt if we lugged all this overnight stuff into the woods all day, and we found what we were looking for before night fell? I try to joke, but judging by the look on Blue's face, he doesn't understand the joke. You want to stay out here in the forest? He whispers hesitantly. Did you not? I ask back, trying to find better words and failing. I shouldn't be surprised. Blue didn't get the choice to sign up for this extracurricular assignment. He got pulled into it. It's my fault we're both here in this dangerous situation. You said it was dangerous. Blue hedges in such a soft voice that it makes my chest ache. Yes, but when are we ever going to be allowed free rein of the forest without anyone looking over our shoulder? This place has been stocked with every kind of magic creature that could conceivably coexist on this plot of land, and a couple who really shouldn't. Don't you think that's cool? I offer hesitantly. Blue was raised more as an indoor being than an outdoor one. He might just genuinely not like such an intense and potentially dangerous hike. The magic is exciting for me, but it might not be for Blue. The Sankin was beautiful. He nods bashfully, like he's ashamed to have found such a majestic animal fascinating. I draw the chalk outline to circle Blue and the rest of the stuff we've set up. It's not powerful atrophic magic, I don't have time for that, but it is enough to ward our presence from anything aside from what crosses our path visually. It will have to do. I'll go get water for us, and then I will ramble for uncomfortably long amounts of time about anything that you point at. Okay? I offer. I don't know what's gotten into me. I don't usually talk this much, and it's not like I love the sound of my own voice, but something's telling me that the silence isn't good for Blue. It's weird. Mostly because I haven't spoken this much since Blue was first recovering, and I had to learn to fill every bit of silence to put him at ease. Blue just ducks his head and nods, deciding to take it upon himself to set up camp for the night. It's probably just my imagination that I see a rosy blush dusting his cheeks. I pick up our mostly empty water skins and head back down to where our little brook was. The water's fresh. Even if I didn't dip my finger in to test it first, there are plenty of little luminols coming out now that the sun is coming down. The little reed-looking things are technically fish, and they require a steady source of moving fresh water to live. In any other situation, I would love to watch them sprouting from the ground. I would marvel at them, captivated not only by their soft glow, but by the faint magical aura they produce to attract something to feed on. But right now, the water skins won't fill fast enough. All I seem to be capable of is worry nowadays. Blue didn't actually want to come on this little trip. This is something that got sprung on the both of us. But while it's at least interesting to me, it could get him hurt or worse. I've been so stuck up my own head all day, just spouting useless facts about things that I find exciting. Blue's probably bored to tears, but he feels like he can't say anything. You see him as nothing but a tool. My stomach turns as I remember Linnell's words. I'm forcing Blue to get involved in this whole mess. It's entirely my fault, and he doesn't even feel safe enough to tell me how he really feels. Blue's good at telling people what they want to hear. He'd told me as much when I'd asked, whenever he'd talked about his previous masters. He's probably just pretending, just hoping that what he's puzzled out as the correct answer is what I want to hear. And I haven't really done anything to break him of those habits. I am the worst. I'm trudging back to camp, wallowing in my own little pity bucket, when I realize that Blue's outside the circle. My mind swims for a second, confused as to why he would leave the circle when I'd explained it was the only thing keeping him safe. But then I hear him scream, and all coherent thoughts fly out of my head. I go into a dead sprint towards the campsite. I can feel my heart pounding out of my chest as I get a clearer picture of what's happening. There's no vicious animal, angry imp, or even another student, but Blue's tangled in vines from the forearm down. He's struggling against the vines, but before I can go through the list of creatures that have the ability to control plants like that, I see the spotted bulb hanging just behind the tree line. Oh, stars. The pollen cloud is already dissipating, and I can see the way the resistance leaves Blue's form, the way he slows his struggling, the way his screaming quiets. I stretch out my conscious mind into the plants, into the forest, in a way that I haven't in a long time. My senses blur for a moment until everything snaps back with unnatural clarity. The forest isn't just what I can see. What I can feel is so much more than that. I can see the mushrooms, the fairy circles, but like this, I can feel where they draw their energy, where they are conduits, and how they drain off the power they produce. It's nothing to choke the life out of that dangerous plant, first severing the flower and then forcing the roots to take in the cold. If the roots survive, it will not bloom again for at least 2 years. The flower's bell slumps forward, its vines pulling it forward in stuttery jerks as the last of its energy is drained. It barely makes it to the barrier before it slumps over, unable to do anything more now that it's been cut. I wasn't being very careful with my powers, but at the moment, I really don't care. I rush over to Blue's side, but he barely registers my presence. He's slumped over on the ground, staring blankly forward at the vines that still loosely entangle his arms. The thorns have pushed into his flesh, and though there's not much blood, I know that it's far too late already. I can see the rapid, shallow breathing as he looks up at me. "Master!" he shouts as he finally notices my presence. He pulls himself up, only to slump over on me, a goofy grin pasted over his face. "Blue!" I can't help the way my voice wavers, but he just continues like he hasn't heard me. "Master, I feel weird," he says, his voice a low whisper as he pokes at the inflamed skin on his arms like it's someone else. "I feel hot and—" He giggles, interrupting his own statement as he looks back up to me. "Floaty." "Oh, stars," I whisper as I get a good look at him. His pupils are blown so wide that I can barely see any of the blue of his iris. It's clear that he's not only gotten the toxins from the thorns in his system, but he's inhaled some of the pollen cloud too. He's high as a griffin rider. "Master, it's too hot," he whines, pulling at his coat, but his hands are fumbling with the buttons, they're so shaky. "Master, He stutters, pressing his nose into my neck instead of finishing his sentence. "Blue," I say quietly, trying to mimic the calm, informative tone of a medical professional, trying to ignore the way he's pressing himself against me, the way he's practically burrowing into my chest. "You are going to be suffering from a variety of symptoms in the next few hours. Okay? First is an internal fever. You don't have to worry. It isn't hazardous to your health, it is just uncomfortable. Then some muscular pain and body aches. You're probably going to feel congested and have a headache when this is over." "Master," he pants against my neck, laying his body flush against mine as he whines, "I want you to fuck me." "And you are going to feel a significant increase in your sex drive," I finish, wishing that I could ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. My mind flashes useless facts, useless things that remind me that there are no common or particularly safe ways to treat this, other than pulling out as much of the toxin as you can. But even that only affects the amount of time that the effects will hold. This is a situation where you treat symptoms and ride out the worst. He's not that far gone yet, not considering how bad the worst reported cases had gotten. Plus, I got to him almost as soon as the thing had stuck him. If I can get everything out, he should only have a half hour, an hour at most, where he's under the influence of the toxin. I'm lucky he's still coherent, but that concept is hard to reconcile with what he's just said. "You smell good," Blue purrs, nuzzling into my neck. My stomach turns at the stricken whine that comes out of him when I push him away. Blue, you just breathed in the spores of the Rokatari. You're going to want to have sex, but it's not going to be you. It's going to be the spores messing with your head. The toxin that coats the thorns is messing with your hormones. I try to explain clinically, trying desperately not to think about how much worse it is to go through the withdrawal without someone helping. Blue whimpers as I start unwinding the vines from his arms. Nothing scratched too deep, but the honey-tinted fluid welling up from the wound is promising. I press hard against the skin surrounding the puncture, forcing the blood and toxin to well up before I dip my head and hollow my cheeks, drawing out as much as I can. Even with the iron tint of his blood, I can still taste the unmistakable cloying sweetness of the toxin. It takes 2 or 3 tries before I'm sure there's nothing left in the wound, and that all I'm spitting out is blood. The skin has purpled under my attention, and I can't help but run my thumb over it in a bid to be soothing as I move to another puncture. I think I want to have sex right now, Blue blurts out, but then he squints, ducking his head as though he's considering the validity of the statement he's just given. Yeah, I think we'd have really good sex. He nods, agreeing with himself. Blue, I start with a warning in my tone, but I dismiss it, moving on to the next puncture wound. He's coherent enough to keep a conversation, but there's no use arguing with him. I've explained the effects of the toxin already. The best thing I can do is get it out of him. Do you not agree? He asks, bringing his fingers to my cheek, stroking the skin there with loving care despite the discomfort I'm creating. Blue, you aren't in control of yourself right now. I state the obvious as he brushes some of his own blood from my lips. I think I am. I feel loopy, but I still feel like me, he says, brow furrowing at my answer. I want you, not the Roki plant. Rokatari, I correct, before shaking my head. That isn't the important part. Sure, that one too. He tries to wave his hand flippantly, but I continue to hold his wrists where I have them. Blue, I can't, I start, but Blue cuts me off. What do you mean you can't? He nearly screams in my face, pulling away from me in earnest now. When it was them, he stutters, his voice catching in his throat, forcing him to stop and take a ragged breath. When it was them, it was all I was good for. My heart aches at the tears brimming in his eyes. You treat him like a tool. I'm just like every other one of them. He thinks of me in the same terms as all his other masters, as though he's just some thing, as though I could only see him in terms of what he's good for. Blue, I am not going to use you. I hesitate to use the crass term, but the words are echoing in my head, eating away at my mind. When have you ever? Blue's ears quirk in confusion as he looks up at me with wide eyes. He shifts forward, reaching hesitantly towards me until I open my arms for him. He pulls himself up into my lap, curling his fingers in the fabric of my shirt like he's scared that I'm going to throw him off. I let him squirm until he's settled, finding a comfortable place in my arms where he can hide his face in my shoulder. I could have kept my mouth shut, he whispers. I could have said nothing. I have that much control. But He stutters, and I can feel that he's starting to get hard, can hear the soft whimper that follows as he tries to restrain his hips and keep from rutting against me. I'm not lying. I do want, he gasps, trying to speak even through the distractions. Blue, I try to interject, but he just barrels on like he didn't even hear me. You never treated me like you should. I was always important. You make me important. He finishes quietly, letting his face fall to my chest. His hand is still fisted in my shirt, pulling me closer, and this time I don't push him away. Stars, was this the talk I was so dreading? Just a few simple sentences passed back and forth? A simple little check-in to see how we were doing? How could I have been so foolish as to let this insanity drag on for a week? A week of anxiety and insecurity when we just needed to sit and talk seriously. Or at least, without inhibitions. Blue's still in a rather problematic state. There's still plenty of toxin to drain from his wounds, and I see to that as quickly as I can. But the rapidly spreading flush tints Blue's body. He's hard. And for the next half hour at least, he's going to be very horny. I give him a gentle kiss on the lips as I lay him down on the bedroll. It's hard to back away from him, but I try to give him some space even as I lean over him. The last thing I want is to trigger any unpleasantness. You are sure about this? You can tell me to stop any time. I'll stop, but you're sure you want my help with this? It's going to addle you. I don't want to do something you might not want just because you aren't thinking straight, and I ramble until Blue mercifully silences me by pulling me down to him for another kiss. You can use me. He smiles at me so sweetly, like he doesn't know how wrong what he's just said is. Blue, I'm not going to do that, I whisper as I stroke my fingers through his silky hair, trying desperately to backpedal without causing Blue any panic. Was I too hasty? Is this simply too soon? Am I pushing too hard? Blue was all right just a second ago. He'd acknowledged that I treat him differently from his past owners, but now it's like he's falling back on old habits. He'd said that I treat him differently, so why does he think that this will be the same? I will be good for you. He says it like a promise, like it's his most solemn oath. I'll do my best to make you happy. I'm good at this, when I want to be, I swear. I won't fight, I promise, no matter what you want. He pleads, pulling at my shirt, trying to pull me back down, closer to him. No, Blue. I try to sound comforting, rubbing soothing little circles into his arms. I don't know where this has gone so wrong, but the last thing I need is Blue thinking it's his fault when he's in such a sensitive state. You said, I want it, he says in a quiet voice, almost to himself, before he refocuses his eyes on me. Kara, I want to have sex with you. He meets my eyes and speaks with such authority that I hesitate. It's different. He's admitted as much. He's said multiple times that I treat him differently than any of his other masters. But I've never thought of the other side of that. He's never had to deal with a master like me. He's used to the script he used for his other owners. It's the only way he knows how to ask. It's not that he thinks I'm going to hurt him. He just has no context for anything else. All right, sweetheart, you're right, I whisper, allowing myself to get closer, brushing the sweat-slick hair out of his face. I indulge myself, allowing myself to go slow even as Blue whines and squirms under me. For once, Blue doesn't need to be told to let himself make noise. There's something hypnotic about the process of stripping him down. I'm entirely captivated with each new stretch of skin that's revealed. I kiss every scar, and Blue seems to appreciate the lavish attention. You want to know some fun things about the Rokatari? I ask, even though Blue's eyes have gone half-lidded and distant. I'm not sure how present he is, but he does at least pretend to hear me, letting his ears flick at the sound of my voice. The nectar specifically works very nicely as a lube. Blue gives a whine as I extract myself from his grasp and dip my fingers into the thick petals of the severed bulb. The thick amber liquid sticks to my fingers, and though it does have the very sweet smell of the flower, I know that it has none of the sweetness. In fact, it's supposed to be entirely flavorless, and it certainly has nothing dangerous in it. Blue stares for a moment before he pushes himself to his elbows and slowly licks the sticky substance from my finger, entirely captivated by the mostly clear nectar. The rough drag of his tongue is sinful, but then he sucks my fingers into his mouth, and the tight, slick heat has me hard in my pants. "Well, aren't you eager?" I joke, even though it's unfair. Blue's pupils are so wide, and I doubt he could restrain himself if he tried, but the unthinking, pliable way he's yielding under my hands is doing things to me that are hard to describe, especially knowing that this isn't entirely the fault of the plant. It's odd. It's my Blue, and yet it's not. The Rokatari isn't one of the more terrifying plants that can take over the body of its host. That's reserved for a few too many horrifying fungal species. This is Blue, just without any of the reservations. Nothing matters more to him than the sensations of the moment, and he has no ability to consider anything more than that. No ability to consider repercussions. Apparently, the momentary distraction of being caught up in thought is more than enough for Blue to take advantage of. Before I know it, he has my pants down, and I don't miss the look of satisfaction that passes over Blue's face at my state. He licks a confident stripe up the underside of my dick before suckling delicately on the head. My fingers go to the back of his head, tangling in his hair with every intention of making him go slow, making sure that he doesn't push himself. But when he takes me down to the root without hesitation, it's all I can do to hold on for the ride. "I'm going to be so good for you," he murmurs as he pulls back, pressing a kiss to the base of my cock before delivering a series of kitten licks back up the shaft. I shut my eyes against those words. It's hard enough to remember that he doesn't mean those words the way I'm hearing them. It's what he's used to saying. He doesn't have anything else that has ever provided good results. Even still, it reminds me of the delicate situation that Blue's coming from. Something in my mind clicks as I realize something that I can do to make this different, separate me from Blue's other owners. I'm almost glad for his addled state. Otherwise, this would probably never work. I take advantage of the next time Blue comes up for air, pushing him back until he's lying down again. I don't waste any time, letting my fingers find the slick nectar of the Rokatari again as I kiss Blue. His lips are a little swollen from their recent use, but it doesn't make him any less eager. His long eyelashes flutter as he parts his lips to allow my tongue entrance. Seeing that he's sufficiently distracted, I slide my other hand behind me, prepping myself with my fingers as quickly as I can. It's been a long time, but the motions are familiar. I grab a little more slick for my palm once I'm done, giving Blue a slow, firm stroke that certainly catches his attention. His tail flicks as his hips jerk forward in an uncontrolled motion. An explosive purr rumbles in Blue's chest, and I can't help the warmth that brings to my own chest. Well, I hope he'll like this even better. I can't help the smile that comes to my face as I straddle his hips. "What are you doing?" Blue giggles as I shift position, though I can see the confusion on his face. "Well, you said you wanted to have sex," I say, pressing a kiss to Blue's lips. But whatever protest was on his lips dies behind a strangled whine as I guide his dick. "I just want to show you, all right?" I whisper as I sink down on his cock, pressing another kiss to his lips. "It doesn't have to be something that only one person enjoys. It doesn't have to be about pleasing someone and just suffering through for their sake." The strangled gasp that Blue makes as I bottom out on his dick makes me chuckle low in my throat and roll my hips just to hear it again. "Come on now, Blue. Aren't you going to be gentle with me?" I joke, brushing his hair out of his face so he can't hide like he usually does behind that curtain of hair. "Master, this isn't—" Blue's voice wavers, but I can't listen to him say that this is wrong or, worse, disrespectful. "No, no, Blue. You have too fine a dick for nobody to enjoy." I cut him off, letting my hips cant a little and pull another moan from him. "So, how about you show me a good time?" I don't think it would have worked if the toxin weren't well within his bloodstream at the time. If he weren't so horny and his inhibitions weren't being repressed, he would have made more of a fuss. He probably would have tried, again, to explain to me the impropriety of the situation, or maybe some misguided thoughts about how we shouldn't be doing this. Luckily for me, he doesn't waste any time with useless arguing. Blue goes slow, moving tentatively with a hesitance that I would describe as maddening if I thought for a moment that he was being a tease on purpose. I can read the anxiety in the tense line of his body. He thinks, "Stars, he's worried he's going to hurt me." Even with the toxin making lust burn in his body, I can still see the concern in his eyes, the way he moves so slowly, with his hands at his side like he's too afraid to touch me. "Blue, you can touch me," I say gently, taking his hands in my own. I almost startle when I look down at my own body to place his hands. I bite my lip to stop an involuntary sound of shock at the smooth skin that doesn't belong there. The scars are covered by the glamour, but Blue will feel them if he touches me. I try not to feel guilty as I guide his hands towards skin that will match what he sees. I know he's not far enough gone that he would ignore the disparate feelings if he found them. He's being careful with me. Too careful to miss something like that. I don't want to have to deal with this fallout right now. Not when everything's so fragile already. Blue's hands settle delicately where I've placed them, and I rest my hands over his, if only to feel him press a little more firmly. "Blue, you're not hurting me. I like this. I love you. Trust you. Okay?" I ask, trying to ignore the way the words almost caught in my throat, trying to figure out when the words I had wanted to say had become true. Blue starts cautiously again, but at my enthusiastic support, and some extra help from my hips pushing for him to find a new speed, Blue settles himself into the rhythm. Even with this as a wonderful distraction, my mind still wanders back to the Rokatari. How did the flower get there? They move, but very slowly, maybe a mile in a month at the peak of their growing season, unless they're actively chasing something. There's no way that one could sneak up on us like that. Unless we were being played with. That sparks something in me. The idea that I'm getting played with and Blue is getting caught in the crossfire. It's wrong and rude and the cruelest of pranks. My eyes go to the forest, to the line of trees that surrounds this little clearing. We have an audience.